Welcome to Finance Empire Real Life Stories. Have you ever stayed late at work while everyone else went home, believing that one day your loyalty would finally pay off? Have you ever watched someone walk into a position you spent years fighting for, simply because of their last name? Imagine giving your best years to a company, missing birthdays, cancelling vacations, drinking cold coffee at midnight while fixing problems nobody else could solve. And then one morning, the promotion you sacrificed everything for is handed to someone who hasn't even learned where the meeting rooms are. Today's story is not just about office politics. It is about frustration, betrayal, ambition, and the painful moment when hard work collides with favoritism. This is the story of Marcus, a man who spent 10 years climbing a corporate ladder only to discover that the top floor belonged to the CEO's family all along. And while you enjoy this emotional real-life story, you'll also improve your English naturally through advanced workplace vocabulary, realistic business conversations, and powerful expressions used in modern offices every day. So grab your coffee, sit back, and let's step into the world of corporate pressure, silent resentment, and impossible choices. The city was still dark when Marcus parked his aging silver sedan outside the accounting firm. Rainwater shimmered across the empty streets, reflecting the glow of traffic lights like broken pieces of glass. It was 6:17 a.m., and as usual, Marcus was the first employee to arrive. Arthur, the elderly security guard downstairs, looked up from his newspaper and smiled the moment Marcus entered the lobby. "Morning, Marcus. Same routine?" Marcus held up 2 coffee cups with a tired grin. "One black coffee for me, one dangerously sweet coffee for you." Arthur laughed warmly. "You've been here so long you know my order better than my own wife." Marcus chuckled politely, but deep down, the joke carried truth. He knew everything about this building, every creaking elevator, every flickering light bulb, every client account, every financial loophole the company quietly depended on him to fix. For 10 years, Marcus had lived inside this place more than he lived at home. He stepped into the elevator and loosened his tie slightly as the doors closed. The mirrored walls reflected a man in his late 30s, with tired eyes and permanent stress lines around his mouth. People called him reliable, dependable, the backbone of the department. But nobody ever called him successful. The 12th floor smelled faintly of printer ink and fresh carpet cleaner. Marcus walked past rows of empty desks before arriving at his own workstation near the windows. Everything was perfectly organised: colour-coded folders, clean spreadsheets, sticky notes arranged neatly beside his keyboard. A framed family photo sat beside his monitor, showing his wife Elena and their 8-year-old daughter Sophie, smiling on a beach vacation they took 4 years ago. Their last real vacation. Marcus sat down heavily and opened his laptop. The screen glowed against the darkness of the office as emails immediately flooded in. Overnight corrections, client concerns, urgent audit requests. Normal people would feel overwhelmed. Marcus simply sighed and got to work. By 7:45 a.m., the office slowly began filling with employees. Chairs rolled across floors, coffee machines hissed, phones started ringing, and almost every problem eventually found its way to Marcus. "Marcus, the Walker file is corrupted." "Marcus, can you review this budget?" "Marcus, the Henderson account is threatening to leave." "Marcus, quick question." He answered every request calmly without complaint. That was the problem. Marcus had become too useful. At 9:10 a.m., his friend Dana from Human Resources leaned against his cubicle wall, holding a tablet. "You heard the announcements today, right?" she whispered. Marcus nodded casually, though his heartbeat instantly quickened. The vice president of operations was retiring after 32 years. The position was the biggest promotion available in the company. Higher salary, bigger office, executive authority, financial security for his family. Everything Marcus had worked toward for a decade. "You nervous?" Dana asked. Marcus smiled carefully. "Honestly, I think I earned this one." Dana gave him a look filled with sympathy he didn't fully understand at the time. "You definitely earned it," she replied quietly. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the elevator doors opened again. The entire office suddenly shifted. Conversations stopped. People straightened in their chairs. Mr. Sterling, the CEO, walked across the floor with his usual polished confidence. Expensive watch, perfect grey suit, smile rehearsed over decades of corporate power. But today he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a young man Marcus had never seen before. Tall, expensive haircut, designer shoes, navy suit that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly mortgage payment. The young man looked distracted, barely paying attention as he typed on his phone while walking. Mr. Sterling stopped directly at Marcus's desk. "Marcus," the CEO said warmly, "exactly the person I wanted to see." Marcus stood immediately. "Good morning, sir." Mr. Sterling placed a proud hand on the young man's shoulder. "This is my son Julian. He just graduated from Stanford Business School." Julian gave a lazy half wave without looking up from his screen. "Hey," Marcus forced a polite smile. "Nice to meet you." "Julian's going to spend some time learning the business," Mr. Sterling continued. "And frankly, there's nobody better to teach him than you." Something cold moved quietly through Marcus's chest. "Of course," Marcus replied professionally. For the next several days, Julian followed Marcus around the office like a bored tourist visiting a museum he didn't care about. Marcus explained compliance reports. Julian checked sports scores. Marcus demonstrated financial forecasting models. Julian asked where the best steakhouse in the city was located. Marcus spent 2 hours teaching advanced spreadsheet systems, only for Julian to accidentally close the program and laugh about it. "Man, this accounting stuff is brutal," Julian said one afternoon, while spinning lazily in a chair. "I don't know how you people stare at numbers all day." You people. The phrase lingered in Marcus's mind long after Julian walked away. Still, Marcus remained patient. He convinced himself this was temporary. The CEO simply wanted his son exposed to the business before assigning him some harmless junior position. At least that's what Marcus kept telling himself. But little details started bothering him. Julian receiving private meetings with executives. Julian measuring the vice president's office with a tape measure while joking about paint colours. Julian casually referring to future company decisions despite having worked there less than 2 weeks. The office noticed it too. People whispered near coffee machines. Conversations stopped when Marcus approached. Employees exchanged uncomfortable glances whenever Julian entered meetings, pretending to understand discussions far beyond his experience. One evening, Marcus stayed late reviewing quarterly reports when Dana quietly approached his desk again. "You should probably prepare yourself," she said softly. Marcus looked up slowly. "Prepare for what?" Dana hesitated before answering. They already made the decision. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "No," he said immediately. "The board hasn't even interviewed candidates yet." Dana looked away. "They're not interviewing candidates, Marcus." The silence between them felt suffocating. Marcus stared blankly at the spreadsheets on his screen, but the numbers suddenly looked meaningless. 10 years. 10 years of missed anniversaries, 10 years of skipped family dinners, 10 years of solving impossible problems while executives took credit above him. And suddenly none of it mattered, because bloodlines mattered more. That night Marcus arrived home later than usual. Elena was sitting at the kitchen table, helping Sophie with homework while leftover pasta sat cold on the stove. "You missed dinner again," Elena said quietly. Marcus loosened his tie slowly. "Sorry, busy day." "You always say that." Sophie looked up hopefully. "Daddy, are we still going to the zoo Saturday?" Marcus forced a smile. "Of course we are." But Elena noticed the exhaustion in his eyes immediately. "What happened?" she asked once Sophie left the room. Marcus sat heavily at the table. "I think they're giving the promotion to the CEO's son." Elena stared at him in disbelief. "The kid who just graduated?" Marcus nodded bitterly. "He doesn't even know how to build a budget report." For a moment neither of them spoke. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Finally Eleanor reached across the table and held his hand. "You deserve better than this company." Marcus looked down at their intertwined fingers. The painful part wasn't just losing the promotion, it was realizing that maybe the company never truly valued him at all. The next morning, the office buzzed with nervous anticipation. Employees crowded into the large conference room, waiting for the official announcement. Marcus sat near the middle of the table, notebook open, heartbeat pounding in his chest like a drum. Mr. Sterling entered with Julian beside him, wearing a confident smirk that immediately told Marcus everything he needed to know. The CEO smiled proudly. "As you know, leadership is about vision, legacy, and preparing the future. Marcus felt the room closing around him. And today, Mr. Sterling continued, I'm proud to announce our new Vice President of Operations. He placed a hand on Julian's shoulder. My son, Julian Sterling. The room erupted into forced applause, but Marcus didn't clap immediately. Because in that moment, something inside him finally broke. And as Julian smiled proudly at a position he hadn't earned, Marcus realized the hardest lesson of his entire career. Sometimes the ladder was never meant for you to climb. Sometimes it was only there to keep you working, while someone else waited comfortably at the top. And for the first time in 10 years, Marcus began wondering if loyalty itself had been the biggest mistake of his life. The meeting ended, but Marcus stayed seated for a few extra seconds, staring silently at the polished conference table, while everyone else slowly filed out of the room. Because deep down he already knew something dangerous had started growing inside him. Not anger, not revenge, something far more powerful. The realization that maybe it was finally time to stop building someone else's empire. I'll see you in part 2. The applause faded quickly after the meeting, but the damage it caused stayed behind like smoke after a fire. Marcus walked back to his desk slowly, while employees avoided eye contact with him. Some looked embarrassed. Others looked frightened. A few quietly shook their heads with sympathy. Nobody needed to say anything. Everyone understood exactly what had happened. The promotion had never been a competition. It had been an inheritance. Marcus sat down at his desk and stared at the blinking cursor on his computer screen. For years, this office had felt like a second home. Now it suddenly felt cold and unfamiliar, like a hotel room after checkout time. Across the floor, Julian laughed loudly while 2 executives congratulated him near the coffee machine. Vice President at 24, one of them said. That's impressive. Marcus almost laughed out loud at the absurdity of it. Impressive? Julian couldn't even create a pivot table without asking for help. But Marcus stayed silent. That was what professionals did. They swallowed disappointment quietly and kept working. Or at least that's what Marcus had always believed. Around noon, Dana from HR approached his desk carrying a folder. Her expression was cautious, almost apologetic. You okay? She asked softly. Marcus forced a tight smile. Fantastic. Living the dream. Dana sighed. I know this is unfair. Marcus leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. You know what the worst part is? What? I actually believed hard work mattered here. Dana didn't answer because there was nothing honest she could say. A few minutes later, Julian suddenly appeared beside Marcus's desk, holding an expensive leather notebook he clearly hadn't used. Hey, Marcus, Julian said cheerfully. Dad says you're basically the company encyclopedia, so I'll probably be leaning on you a lot. Marcus looked up slowly. Leaning on me? Yeah, Julian replied casually. You know all the boring technical stuff? Numbers, compliance, budgets? Honestly, I'm more of a big picture guy. Big picture guy. Marcus repeated the phrase silently in his mind, while fighting the urge to say something reckless. Instead, he nodded professionally. Of course. Julian smiled. Perfect. Oh, and can you help me prepare tomorrow's operations presentation? Dad wants me to lead the meeting, but these spreadsheets look like alien code. He dropped a thick folder onto Marcus's desk without waiting for an answer. Then he walked away. Just like that. Marcus stared at the folder for several seconds. It contained 3 months of financial projections, department restructuring plans, and operational forecasts. Work that would normally take days of careful analysis. And Julian expected it finished overnight. Marcus slowly looked around the office. Everyone had seen it happen. Nobody said a word. Because in corporate life, silence was survival. That evening, Marcus stayed at the office until nearly 10:01 p.m., correcting mistakes Julian hadn't even bothered to read. Outside the windows, the city glowed beneath the dark sky while exhaustion settled heavily into Marcus's shoulders. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Elena. Are you coming home soon? Marcus stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. Running late again? 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her message came through. Sophie waited up for you. Marcus closed his eyes. Guilt hit him harder than anger ever could. For 10 years, he had sacrificed his family believing it would eventually create a better future for them. But now, Now he wasn't even sure what he had sacrificed everything for. The next morning, Julian confidently presented Marcus's work to senior leadership, as if he had personally created every chart and strategy himself. Marcus sat quietly near the back of the room, while executives nodded with approval. "Excellent vision, Julian," one board member said. "Very innovative," another agreed. Marcus felt something painful twist inside his chest, because the ideas they were praising were his, the solutions were his, the late nights were his, but the recognition belonged to someone else. After the meeting, Julian slapped Marcus lightly on the shoulder. "Couldn't have done it without you, buddy." Buddy. Marcus smiled mechanically while Julian walked away, receiving congratulations from executives. That afternoon, Marcus overheard two junior analysts whispering near the printer. "Everyone knows Marcus should have gotten the promotion." "Yeah, but what can you do? The CEO's son is untouchable." Untouchable. The word echoed in Marcus's mind for the rest of the day. Because they were right. Talent could be ignored, experience could be overlooked, loyalty could be exploited. But family connections, those were untouchable. By Friday, the cracks in the department were already beginning to show. Julian missed an important compliance deadline because he forgot to submit documents Marcus had prepared for him. A client meeting had to be rescheduled after Julian accidentally sent the wrong financial report to the board, and every single problem eventually landed back on Marcus's desk. "Marcus, can you quickly fix this? Marcus, can you double-check Julian's numbers? Marcus, we need your expertise." It never ended. The company had promoted Julian into power, but they still depended entirely on Marcus to keep everything functioning. Late Friday evening, Marcus finally snapped. Not publicly, not dramatically. Quietly, dangerously quietly. He opened Julian's latest email request, asking him to clean up another disastrous report before morning. Marcus stared at the message for nearly a minute. Then, for the first time in 10 years, he closed the laptop without answering. The next morning, chaos exploded across the office. Julian's unfinished report had been presented directly to an important client, and the numbers were completely wrong. Forecasts didn't match. Budgets were inaccurate. Entire sections were missing. Executives rushed through hallways in panic while phones rang non-stop. Marcus arrived at exactly 9 a.m., carrying his coffee calmly. For once, he wasn't running to save the company. And strangely, it felt good. Julian stormed toward his desk looking pale. "Marcus, why didn't you fix the report?" Marcus took a slow sip of coffee. "You never asked me to." "I emailed you," Julian snapped. "At 11:47 p.m., Marcus replied calmly. "Outside office hours." Julian stared at him in disbelief. For years, Marcus had always rescued everyone, no matter how unreasonable the request, no matter how late the hour. But something had changed. The invisible machine keeping the company alive had finally stopped volunteering for abuse. By Monday, tension filled the office like static electricity before a storm. Mr. Sterling called Marcus into his office personally. The CEO's massive office overlooked the city skyline, but Marcus barely noticed the view anymore. Mr. Sterling closed the door behind him. "What's going on with you lately?" the CEO demanded. "Your attitude has changed." Marcus remained calm. "My workload changed." Mr. Sterling frowned. "Julian is still learning." Marcus almost smiled at the absurdity. "Sir, Julian is vice president now. Isn't he supposed to lead?" The CEO's jaw tightened. "You know how important family legacy is to this company." There it was again. Legacy. The polished corporate word for favoritism. Marcus looked directly at the CEO for the first time in years, without fear. "And what about loyalty?" Marcus asked quietly. "Does that matter anymore?" Mr. Sterling sighed impatiently. "Don't make this emotional." Emotional. Marcus nearly laughed. 10 years of sacrifice reduced to a personality flaw. The CEO leaned forward seriously. "Listen carefully, Marcus. Julian has enormous potential. He just needs support during the transition." Support. Another polished corporate word. This one meant do the work quietly while someone else receives the credit. Marcus nodded slowly. Understood. But inside, something fundamental had shifted forever. That evening, Marcus sat alone in his car Outside the office building, long after everyone else had gone home, rain tapped softly against the windshield, while the skyscraper lights reflected across wet pavement. For the first time in a decade, he allowed himself to imagine leaving. The thought terrified him. This company had become his identity, his routine, his security. But maybe that was exactly the problem. Maybe the company knew he would never leave. And maybe that was why they felt comfortable treating him as invisible. Marcus leaned his head back against the seat and stared at the ceiling of the car. Then slowly, he smiled. Not because he was happy, because for the first time in years he finally understood something important. The company needed him far more than he needed them, and once a loyal employee realizes their own value, everything changes. But Marcus still had no idea how dangerous that realization was about to become, because across town, another company had already started paying attention to the chaos inside Sterling Financial, and very soon, Marcus was going to receive an opportunity that would force him to make the hardest decision of his entire career. I'll see you in part 3.